and welcome to the realm of ideas is free to all. This is episode 72, Intellect and Execution. This is a series of ruminations we do once a week. We have a preview on Wednesday, and then we have our program here at 2 o'clock Sunday morning, which is basically when the Atlantic Ocean is sleeping. So that way, since we have very few friends who live in the Atlantic Ocean, maybe a couple of sharks, but you know, we kind of have the ability to kind of pretty much kind of communicate our ideas. So anyway, this this was something that we wanted to talk about in terms of the balance of these two concepts and how maybe there's an unbreakable bond here in terms of like tolerance and the fact that like the tolerance between these two pieces allows you to kind of like be effective. So it's kind of like it was kind of a newish idea that we were working on. So it kind of comes to a good piece. So I'm going to read two pieces from two of my favorite books. You know, you've seen these before. On the one hand, we have The Revolt of the Masses, Ortega Gasset, 1930, and then we have like Voltaire's thoughts on toleration. So from chapter 11, The Abuse of Intolerance. But will every citizen then be allowed to believe either their own unaided reason and to think whatever their own reason tells them, whether it is enlightened or misguided? Yes, that should be allowed, on condition that it does not disturb public order. And that's important, does not disturb public order, because people are not obliged to believe or not believe certain things, but are obliged to respect the customs of their own country. And if Catholics were to say that this is a crime not to believe in the dominant religion, that would simply amount to accusing the first Christians who were their own ancestors and justifying those whom they accuse of having delivered them to be executed. So, the idea as I see it is to basically have the greatest amount of tolerance for the basics of the ideas, and that's separating from actions, the ideas of individuals to basically think and believe as they see fit and understand that as regards the relation to the public order. The public order is what is basically agreed upon by the group. And when that group feels threatened, it basically has to kind of put apart itself and say, this is the reason why which tolerance has to be respected. Now, as I was saying recently, tolerance has to account for accommodating itself with a certain amount of strength, or else it's basically submission. The ability to basically say that is the limit of my tolerance based on the fact that you're now encroaching on some fundamental principles I don't want to have compromised. You have to have the ability to resist. All right. Now, another piece comes from Ortega in The Revolt of the Masses, and he's talking about the idea here. Let me see. I have it here. The primitive and the technical. Now, this was something that I think is something that was a warning in terms of the idea of the intellect and as well as the technical, in the fact that this was something that one had to basically have a certain amount of concern for, or regard, or respect for. All the increased material possibilities which life has experienced run the risk of being annulled when they are faced with the staggering problems that has come upon the destiny of Europe, and in which I once more formulate. The direction of society has been taken over by a type of man who is not interested in the principles of civilization, nor of this or of that civilization, but from what we can judge today of any civilization. Of course, he is interested in anesthetics, motor cars, and a few other things, but this fact merely confirms that his fundamental lack of interest in civilization, for those things are merely its products, and fervor with which he greets them only brings into stronger belief the indifference to the principles from which they spring. Now, again, that is the point, is that the principles by which one is exercising is that which one has to understand. I think one of the crises that we're seeing today is that people are seeing encroachment and understand it from an emotional level, but at the same time, don't understand it in terms of seeing which principles are basically under siege and I think that to me is the concern is that these things still need to be understood and appreciated, but at the same time, they kind of like need to be understood. So that's what I think is happening. I remember seeing a show on where this individual was kind of debating this other person, and even though I did not agree with the person who was making their point, the person who was arguing for the point that I understood and appreciated was failing to understand the principles by which they would have been able to argue successfully against this other individual. And that's the piece that concerns me. Tolerance is a certain valuable part of what comes to us, probably most strongly in the tradition of the Enlightenment in terms of the way in which we see it today. However, right, it is misunderstood and is basically being lost. We talked before about the idea of what happens in the Borges when he talks about what is lost with any generation or with any individual. I believe that there are too many subtle things that are slipping away from us and allowing us to compromise ourselves. Now, at the same time, new eras, new epochs, new generations come about. And the bigger problem beyond this is the fact that with these cases, uh, is again, as Ortega talks about again in the Role of the Masses in a separate chapter, about the fact that that destiny, that circumstance, well, let's say the circumstance by which any particular generation presents itself, right, is that which allows the opportunity for a group to fall below itself or achieve. Now, again, it's not just the question of correction, it's the question of having direction. It's the question of basically not fixing something, but having the understanding of is it broken and if we understand how it works. My concern, and this is a kind of grave existential concern for me, is that even if we were able to identify what we feel, we've lost the principles by which they're understood. And as a result, greater problem is the fact that we could no longer make corrective courses because we don't understand how to do so anymore. So I think right now, the general principles, right, that which was the kind of premise or the kind of like the terrain of the natural philosopher, right, in which there were general principles, are those things that are basically kind of being lost or even kind of not being appreciated to even understand their importance. This is a grave concern. But that's an extreme point. So, what we're going to talk about is the fact that there's a balance between these two aspects, the intellect and the execution. But there's also the fact that they, in extremes, become incredibly inertial. And that's something that we also know is something we need to avoid. So, in relationship to that, we begin from that point of view. So, as a result, my concern is that we are entering new times. Not if it's generational or if it's epochal, if that's a word, or if it's actually kind of like somewhat kind of generational, based on the duration or the kind of point in which like certain things become part of a larger situation. We talk about the Renaissance, or we talk about the Enlightenment, we talk about certain empires, but within those things we talk about certain subgroups, and then we can talk about individual aspects. So as these times change, are we capable of identifying them so we can understand the circumstances by which we can determine how we can approach that aspect, or in fact do we basically kind of just wander aimlessly and kind of like fall fall apart? So with that said, let's enter into What's new in Julie?
I'm
Hi, Pete.
here. I'm
Yeah.
having spring allergies and
Oh,
was
sorry, Pete.
trying to clear my sinuses.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't really
Okay.
very clear.
Also, we'd like to say we are very, we want to give a big thanks to our friends at Tea's Tea. Right
Oh,
here we
yes.
have Jasmine.
Oh, I
And
have part of a mint left.
oh, good. And also, thank you. We received a great gift box, and we're going to basically have that available at our next event. And we are really excited about having a partnership with Tea's Tea, having them follow us on all our platforms, and making sure that the benefit that we get from this product is something that the rest of us can share. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, it's like, I mean, aside from water, I think the only other thing I drink is Tea's Tea. My favorite is rose. I mean, I like jasmine. I like mint.
Here it is.
I haven't had oolong in a while, but I mean, Julie said that the oolong
Oh,
is
yes.
actually
It's
quite
actually
good. Alrighty,
golden.
so
Golden.
tell us, Julie, what's new in Julie?
Thank you, P. Well, what is new is I didn't have time to write, but I did have time to do a lot of work on my drawing.
Which you see in the
Oh, yes.
I guess frontispiece, or
Yes.
the kind of the image that kind of shows up on our
We might have to,
YouTube
yes.
feed. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of graphite on
Mhm.
this, so it might be a little bit shiny.
Mhm.
But what you're seeing is an Edo period Japanese writing box, and arising out of the inkstone is a musical instrument called the sho, SHO, which actually sounds like a mournful human wail or the birth of the phoenix. Actually, it's actually associated in a very strong way with the myth of the phoenix, and it does come also from a more ancient Chinese instrument, the shape of which the silhouette is said to resemble the folded wings of a phoenix, of the mythical bird hybrid chimerical creature. So the show is rising out of the turgid waters, which are in fact the inkstone itself. I finished the architecture of the beautiful lacquered makie, means sprinkled with gold, ink box. And you can see here, right behind here, is the water dropper, which is a flowering bamboo element that actually lifts out. And what I will be doing, though, is not drawing the designs and the elements that are on the actual box in the Japanese wing at the Met. Instead, I have my own research, as I always do, into what this drawing is really about, which is something called lignification, which is the hardening or strengthening of something. Thank you. On a cellular level, which is the bamboo. And this I found really particularly fascinating. When bamboo is young or youthful, it contains about 10 times the amount of sugars or carbohydrates uh, than it ends up having when it gets older. So when it gets older, actually the bamboo actually loses its sugars, loses its carbohydrates, and gets stronger, thicker, and more resilient.
Okay. What else is going on? How's your painting?
Oh, my painting is going extremely well. It's kind of too big to show, but
no, I know. Just curious.
Oh yeah. Well, uh, I made some major innovations on my painting actually. In the mustache of Baron Schmiedel, the court jester to King Augustus II. What I did was I applied tiny little gold orbs. There is something called granulation, which was a technique used in ancient gold. In fact, we saw it in the Greek gold show all those years ago at the Met,
Mm-hmm.
which is tiny little beads of gold put together and joined there that almost look like a paved path or highly textured surface, almost like a fish skin or even a shark skin of gold. And sorry, I'm just so congested. Anyway, so what I did was, as if the Baron is very unaware of the swirling events that surround him, as one who, say, is walking through the garden, faints or passes out while all of nature is in a frenzied dance around his or her head, and the pollen and all those, how should I say, all those leavings, cuttings, offshoots of natural processes, seeds, pods, bits of leaves, bits of roots, things floating in the air, simply land on their body, land on their face, cannot interact because the human is almost in a catatonic state.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So basically, given our topic, how would you like to start?
Oh, well.
I mean, I can start kind of talking about what I was saying, or you can kind of,
Well,
it's up to you.
Well, you want to start and then I'll come in, or
Okay. Yeah. So I think
sure.
that basically the two pieces I spoke about there were like things of what we talked about, the series of principles and the idea of the public order. Now, the public order is really pretty much based a lot on those principles. So the thing is, what I think is the concern is most times these principles are not things that most people concern themselves with to try to understand. They feel the weight of things, but they really don't understand the principles by which this weight is kind of bared. So as a result, we have two pieces that, if out of balance, right, the intellect and the execution, that basically kind of give rise to this problem. So in the case of the person who overthinks things, we often know about that individual, the person who kind of sees a situation that doesn't really come to kind of become ever executed because of the fact that these things don't have a grounding, as the person either gets, for whatever reason, confused or lost. Now, in the case of the execution, if the execution isn't pertaining to anything of consequence, it just becomes futility. So I think in these cases, the idea is to kind of use the two in an unbreakable bond in order to kind of manifest that which constitutes that sense of tolerance of the two in relationship to some sort of circumstance. So with that said, I mean, I think that's a kind of a clear, simple, but not as easily done as you would think. As the fact is, the hard part is understanding what those things that we would call principles or the public order would manifest itself. Now, I think if you were to have this discussion with the people around you and you were to just ask these two simple questions, you'd probably get a lot of confusion, and you'd probably get a lot of consternation, frustration, even kind of like resentment, hostility. It sounds easy, but in fact, it's a lot harder than we think. And like I said, one of the things that concerns me is I find that my concern of principle and process is a kind of like a 24-hour a day job. It's something that I kind of think about, and Julie kind of mentioned last week. She actually mentioned in the preview leading up to this, is that process is a very important thing to kind of constantly kind of be honing. So in that regard, I think that that's the case, that one has to see this as a very important part of your life. Anyway, that's the kind of premise of what I would say to kind of start with. So what would you say? Then how you had talked about, was it
It's Gabrielle Munter. Well, I'd like to start with her.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, I'm just having allergies.
I'm sorry, P.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's still a chance to see it. I will give a plug because it's an excellent, excellent exhibition. It comes down April 26th, so still have about a week and a half to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there is a, yes, that's the
Yeah,
back.
that's the back. Yeah,
And I have the vestiges of
of a
Tea's
mint.
Tea Mint, which I've been carrying around since I got it
No, the other thing that's
in
interesting,
Manhattan.
actually, another good
Mm.
thing is that a Japanese market just opened up a
Ooh,
block from us, which is nice. I mean,
that was great.
mhm.
Yeah, it was really nice to see
So we'll
that.
see,
Maybe
what
they'll
they
have
carried.
it.
But one of the things that's interesting is that
Mhm.
when we look for Tea's tea, we find that jasmine is usually readily available. The rose, till recently, because of the unfortunate
Oh, so
circumstance,
sad.
was readily available. Sometimes they'll have the green. The mint is a little bit rare, and
Mint is very rare. Yeah.
is almost you almost don't find
I
it.
wonder if they make the oolong anymore. It's quite good. It's very smooth. It's a fermented tea.
Yeah, it's a black tea, right?
Well, it's kind of a half black
Oh,
tea.
is it? Okay.
It isn't fully black like, say, Earl Grey or Irish breakfast or English breakfast. It's partially a fermented tea, which
Mm,
has a more
mm,
golden color, and it's very,
mm,
very delicate,
mm,
actually.
mm. There's also the lemongrass one, right?
I
I don't know much about that
don't
one.
know.
That's what it's very hard. I don't see
That's
it
hard to
much.
find
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Anyway, should
yeah.
I?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, at the Guggenheim here in New York City, there's an excellent exhibition, a solo exhibition on floors 4 and 5 of Gabrielle Munter's work. Sadly, it's not in the spiral of the
Ugh.
Guggenheim, which it should be.
Mm,
It's not
mm,
given the prominence it deserves. As you all may or may not know, there was a whole side wing built onto the
mm,
Guggenheim with very conventional gallery space, very
mm,
straight walls. It's not curved. It's not
mm,
like being inside a seashell, which
mm.
I love. There's another show at the Guggenheim which looks like rotting Buicks on a wall and is not my favorite thing. I don't know whose work it is, but it's not great. But the Gabrielle Munter is phenomenal. So when we're talking about intellection versus execution and intellect versus execution, I think there are people who are able to use objects and artifacts as tools of process. And I believe this is a process. So, intellect to execution is a processional march. It is very much something that happens in stages, platforms. It is progressive. It sort of almost has that insistent forward movement of Ravel's Bolero. Not my favorite piece by him, but it does have a persistence and a very, very, very much a movement in a forward kind of a direction, almost
Mm,
like a lurching haunt.
mm, mm,
So what Gabrielle Munter did, she was mostly in Europe,
mhm,
but she had a brief American, trip in between 1898 and 1900. So she was here for a couple of years, and she had a very rudimentary number two bullseye Kodak early version of a camera.
Oh,
I'm
science.
having a lot of pollen puddle.
Sorry, P.
Anyway, what Gabrielle Munter did, and I think in the hands of a great painter, which she was, in the hands of someone who could draw extremely well, which she did, not being a photographer by trade was a huge advantage because she was not burdened by those intellectual rules that she would have had to follow or felt obligated to follow had she been trained as a photographer.
Mm,
So she ended up using her little camera as an intellectual tool to execute her paintings. and I think this is right on topic with what we are talking about. So when you are using a camera as an intellectual research tool, see, rather than holding it at her midsection, which is how anybody would have been instructed to hold the camera, and look through the top mounted viewfinder, which is how everyone else used it. That's not how Gabrielle Munter did. She positioned it way high on her chest. She also placed it on objects and was kind of absent, meaning not holding it, not pointing it, and had very extreme, foreshortened, very dramatic, perspectival views that cast, ordinary rooms or scenes in very chilling, very surreal ways, which she then interpreted with her process in the execution of her paintings. And I would just say she she created novel compositions with strange vantage points, extremely experimental, unorthodox executions, which she then used as what I call a cognitive blueprint for the execution of her very spatially ambiguous, deeply unsettling, and surreally confounding paintings.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm. So I guess
Hmm.
what happens is these activities, the intellectual and the executive, these basically are there to serve. That's okay. To serve principles. Now the question is, what are those principles and what are their desires? We talked about the idea of the public order, as well as the idea of not just the public order, but what are the public's desires? What is it that the public as a group is aspiring to, and how do we manage to create that? So I think in that regard, one has to kind of give mind to the fact that at any particular in any particular period to any particular group, certain issues or articles will present themselves. These become the circumstance, and at that point, the group can either kind of come together and kind of discuss it and have certain kind of like bodies that are there to put together to kind of analyze this, or individuals themselves can put upon themselves to study these things. Similar to the idea of the realm of ideas is free to all, I think the reality is both will take place, and one doesn't have to feel stifled that because the particular group may have a particular approach or may disregard or regard certain things. It doesn't necessarily mean to be that the individual has to exclude themselves from that engagement. So I think in that sense, we kind of come to understand that as a purpose by which we can engage. Okay, that's yeah. So,
Well, I'd like to raise this point. Raise is a pun, as in raising the dead, because that's what this is about.
yeah, okay.
Actually, which is the intellect of the living versus the execution of rites for the deceased. So the intellect, as it is projecting a traumatic state of mind versus a panacea when somebody dies, meaning that process that the living are dealing with when somebody close to them has passed on. There are some very intellectual processes that ended up being executed in some really fascinating ways. I would say that the joy of the realm of ideas is in finding things that are so wondrous and so unexpected. And this is one of those things.
Oh, okay.
Core historical funerary suites, which most people are completely unaware of.
Never heard the term before.
Yeah. And that's why we're here. Right? To share with you things you've never heard of, to occupy your thoughts with beautiful, strange, wondrous, deeply unsettling ideas. So it turns out there's a very long Roman tradition of comforting the living and basically crafting a blanket, a panacea with funerary sweets,
Hmm.
which actually, so they both honor the dead with metaphorical foods,
Hmm.
which is pretty interesting, that represent comfort and the afterlife and mortality. Um, it actually trumps ancient Egypt in its ingenuity. These are really great. So the metaphors that were crafted, the analogies which persist to this day, as far as I know, are this. So as comfort and panacea, the psychological elevation of the living who are grieving is carried out with an intensity of spices. So, a painter's palette of spices, a baker's palette, which is the same as a painter's palette, intense spices that are used in excess, so much so that the cookies are dark with spice.
Interesting.
And these are dark brown cookies. They are called breads, but they are fascinating, meaning an abundance of cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves, which go to provide a powerful aromatic blanket of consolation.
Hmm.
That's what
Interesting.
I'm calling it.
Hmm.
So I have three examples. I can get back to them if you want, or I
Yeah, well, let me
can. Oh
say
yeah,
this.
sure,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
basically, what happens is, these desires, and what you're talking about in terms of
Hmm.
metaphors,
Hmm.
having this interesting conversation with someone today,
Hmm.
actually, was with Mr. Spock,
Sure.
and
Hi,
we were
Mr.
talking
Spock.
about, hey, and he asked me a question, and my answer was that the things by which we manifest, especially the metaphors which we create, are independent, but they exist only, I guess, till the end of consciousness. And I don't mean by consciousness of the individual, because they're independent of any individual consciousness. They basically become part of the mass consciousness of our culture. The difference is, though, they are relative to the process of time and culture itself. So the
Mm.
meaning can be the meaning is fluid. It's not stable, right? But it definitely is independent. So I think that, based on what you're saying, I can
Mhm,
see that as a kind of parcel of how in which these things exist. But I think these are kind of
mhm.
some interesting examples. So with that said, provide us with the examples that you have.
Sure. If I could, we would be eating the bread of the dead with our teas tea because they're actually delicious cookies. I mean, these are really great with tea and coffee.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I
Yeah.
mean, like, we
Yeah.
have a favorite tea,
Yeah.
but do we have a favorite biscuit?
Well, I think we actually, it's a great idea. I believe we should find our favorite biscuit for our teas tea. And I believe we should pair our favorite biscuit with
We
different
could. Well, we
flavors
could.
of
I mean,
teas
well,
tea.
actually, here's another thing. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I drink the tea's tea jasmine with everything. I mean,
Yeah, I do too.
I just kind of drink it throughout the day along with
Mhm.
water.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we have a favorite tea. I mean, like I said, rose was mine, but I'm going to transition that to jasmine.
Mine was jasmine and
Right.
mint.
And mint. I love mint too. It's just that I
Yeah.
find that in the summertime, the mint is more refreshing.
Yeah, it's
So
very
I find it's like,
specific.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I'd say that, like,
Mhm.
that does, I would say I prefer, especially on a really warm day, really humid day, I prefer the mint. But the rest of the time, I mean, I'd say my staple, my go-to is the jasmine.
It
But
used to
in
be the
terms,
rose.
well, yeah, I
That's
mean,
it. It's sad.
yeah, well, actually, the rose was just splendid, kind of
No, it
splendid
was.
one. But I
It's
mean,
so
the jasmine
floral.
was always something you could kind of come back to and kind
Yeah,
of
it's very,
depend on.
very
But again,
solid. Hmm.
that's something similar to what we have in terms of the culture, in
Hmm.
the fact that the culture manifests itself. And there are people who basically feel as if it's holding them
Hmm.
back. There's some people who feel the comfort to it. What was it? We were talking about
Hmm.
something on the way home tonight. We were talking about the fact that certain things have the kind of regularity and the kind of comfort that allows you the the environment by which you feel able to be able to kind of create kind of
Mhm,
satisfaction
mhm,
and execution from your ability to kind of find time to kind of mull things over. In fact,
mhm.
we're talking about the fact that after coming out of the Met, it becomes somewhat kind of cacophonous
Oh,
to
yeah.
go into a kind of like a busy
A loud
izakaya,
restaurant,
and
yeah,
I'm just kind of like just the clamor.
with a bunch of drunk kids
Yes.
who are basically eating food on skewers and drinking massive amounts of alcohol that
Right.
they can't really hold on to very,
Yeah,
very
which
well.
for this, yeah, this
Yeah, they're
particular
not
group
great
is
at
like
that.
was
Yeah.
yeah, is not great at.
Okay.
But
So
anyway,
should
so
I?
yeah, let's go into these.
Okay. There are three types, each of which is a fascinating study of either metaphor or analogy. Oh, can I have a sip? I'm so tired. Mm, mm. So the first type is called pan de morti, Pan, then separate word Dei morti, Morti, which translates to bread of the dead, but it's not bread. These are cookies. Bread is really used as substance, as a core substance,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the loaves and the fishes. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, so these hail from Lombardy, I believe, are still made and used. They are tiny, they're very dark, they're incredibly spiced and dense. And they're almonds, raisins, and dried figs. They're very fruity.
Mm-hmm.
And they are meant as a consolation, and they're full of, sugar and, carbohydrates to give energy to the living, but they're also incredibly spiced. So it is almost as if the scent of these is covering up the scent of death.
Mm.
And I believe that's what they are truly for, because there's a very, how should I say, terrifying, musty kind of, sort of dark, otherworldly scent when you're near someone who's near death or you're in a place of the dead. It's a very terrifying smell. So to actually supplant that with the richness of spices and dried fruits, it's of the earth. It's very earthy. It's living. It's pulsating. It is basically a confirmation that the living still have breath in them.
Mm.
That's what I think.
Mm.
Then the second type, which is fascinating, and you will see this word comes or is very similar to ossification, as in bones. These are called ossa de morti, literally the bones of the dead. These are elongated cookies meant to
Oh,
resemble
cool.
human bones, and they are made crunchy as if you were going to eat somebody's bones. So they are dry, they're white, they're crunchy, made with almonds, egg whites, but not yolks, and sugar, meaning
Mm.
they're thin, they're hard, they're pale, they're crunchy and dry.
They're brittle and they're
They are
white.
brittle like the bones of the dead, and they're
Nice.
made and shaped like bones, meaning
Mm.
these are not comforting, these are fearsome. The
Mm.
first kind are.
Mm.
Then finally, it is the fave de morti, and these are beans of the dead. Actually, these,
Fava beans?
yeah, these are actually styled. These are pink and white and caramel
Huh.
or beige in color. These hail from ancient Rome. They found
Mm.
these in tombs when broad beans actually were
Mhm.
associated with the, and I'm not sure why, the souls of the dead. Meaning these particular broad beans that were eaten and consumed had a very powerful association. So you'd see these baskets of beige and pink and white fave de morti called the beans of the dead, almost like, and I would say, a basket of souls.
Mm. Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me take a guess, right?
Mm.
This is just a guess.
Mm.
If you look at beans, the fava beans are fairly large,
Mhm.
right? If you look at them, and you look at their colors,
Mhm.
they don't look unlike the organs when
Oh.
when a corpse is
Oh,
basically
yeah. That's good.
taken apart. So I mean, they also
Mm.
have some of the shapes. I mean,
Like
kidneys or
Yeah, they
livers
are
or the
very.
heart. And I mean, the soul is,
Or lungs. They are
right,
very
exactly.
much,
And in fact,
yeah.
the soul was always
Mhm.
supposed to dwell within an organ, and it was always kind of talked about in terms of which
Mhm.
organ it is. One of the things that's interesting is what this brings up is the fact that there are these rituals. Now, again, neither of us believes in a Christian God. I don't know if we
Nope.
believe in a divinity in any sense, but I do love the rituals by which the people from which European culture comes from, which I feel myself very much to be an extension of, having grown up in, are really interesting to me. Which was interesting because in the course of the Raphael exhibit that is taking place at the Met, which is a fantastic exhibit.
It is. I'd love
And
to go back. It was
I'd
so
like to say
crowded.
I encourage everyone to go, but I'm not going to say that because I don't want you to go because then it's going to be overly crowded and I can't see it.
Yeah, I know. I can't even
So,
get back in
yes,
yet.
in
Yeah.
terms of my duty and consideration of my fellow man, by all means go and see the Raphael show.
Except don't.
But don't. Because then Julie and I can't see it because honestly, it has been so incredibly
I know.
crowded.
I saw it in
It's
the member
insane.
previews
I
only,
was
and I haven't been
talking
able to get back
was
in.
talking to somebody today, and they said they opened it at 9:00, and by 9:05, it was packed, and the line was
I
out
know.
the
I
door.
couldn't even go.
So don't go.
Yeah.
But go. You know.
Except
So anyway,
please
so back to
don't,
this.
yeah.
So I was looking. So as a result, what's happened is in the room where the large Raphael altarpiece was taken from, they managed to put a painting by the maestro,
Yeah, they
Leonardo,
did.
where I spent probably about 40 minutes today looking at it.
Grand.
You know, before, well, actually probably more than that.
Probably more.
Probably more than that. But anyway, I was there before. So like, and I spent,
then you went back.
Anyway, I went back. But one of the things I did find out as I looked at, and again, this is a piece from like 1505. So it's like, you know, more than halfway through his life. He dies in 1519. So it's like 15 years before he dies. It definitely was a piece that was kind of done to be done. And it kind of like is not some, I mean, but it kind of does show his wondrous mastery of the craft. And what's interesting is I have to go back because what I thought was there was an interesting interplay between 2D and 3D perspective. On the one hand, there is the incredible complexity and intricacy of the manifestations of the hands, of the faces, and the bodies. But at the same time, because the cross plays such a prominent figure, there are these two-dimensional kind of like, I'd say, collages on top of this three-dimensional image, which in itself fluctuates between the two. And I managed to see what I saw was a kind of motion of the cross from the lower part of the piece up to and including the finished piece that actually is a weaver's spool that they use to collect wool, which now has kind of been recognized by the Christ child as his fate. But in the Vitruvian Man, Leonardo kind of manifestation, there is this connection of the pieces of the body in terms of the intellect and the desires of the eros and the other aspects of the crafts. And it's kind of like I'm going to make a drawing, a kind of diagram to kind of what I believe I saw.
That'd be exciting.
Yeah, but it was definitely something, and in the consequence of that, I kind of came to see that, which I kind of think it reminded me of the analysis that one of the analysis that Freud had done in his analysis of Leonardo, but his conclusions were off because he misunderstood a quote. I'm not going from that. I'm just going to simply go from the diagram and we'll see where it goes. But I do believe there's a kind of raising of the cross in the consciousness of the individual, of the Christ child. But that was kind of, but again, that's the kind of, the things that I do on a Friday night when everyone else is out doing whatever they do.
They're sitting at bars, getting drunk and not holding their liquor.
And watching the game.
Yeah.
Don't, like, yeah. Okay. So back to you here.
Well, my third point in our broadcast is one of botany. And as you all may know, we just love plant science and mycology.
I just like plants.
You just
Because
like
they look
plants.
cool.
Yeah, it's a plant growing out of your head.
Yeah, it could be.
Of course there's. Anyway, um, I followed Bruce home one day because there were seeds in his pocket.
That's true. That's true.
Anyway, so in botany, there's very much a scenario of hypothesis versus discovery. I mean, the sheer number of plant species that are undiscovered, we don't even know. They number not in the thousands, but the millions. Plants grow and they hybridize. There are extremophiles that grow in areas where people either never venture or infrequently venture. So one may, as a botanist, hypothesize that a plant may in fact exist, but not have actually seen it, not have collected a specimen. Someone may have drawn a specimen in the golden age of, keeping notebooks when scientists could actually draw, and they did. They would have a field book and they would draw their specimens.
Mm-hmm. I think some people do.
Right.
I think some people still probably do.
Not probably, but
Hmm.
so anyway, versus the actually finding a specimen or specimens. So it is really academic speculation versus field research. And connecting right back to our topic tonight, intellect versus execution in nature.
Hmm.
So human intellect imagining nature's execution, which I think is rather a beautiful idea. So I will say I happened upon one of these and I'm thrilled to talk about it. I was walking in Central Park after I saw the Gabrielle Munter at the Guggenheim, and thanks to our new subscribers at the Guggenheim, and thanks to our new subscribers at the Cooper Hewitt, which I went to afterwards, and saw something amazing. And I confirmed it in my notes. I pulled up a research article that said this can happen and sometimes does. It's relatively rare, but I discovered a cluster of pansies, beautiful, wild purple and white pansies, which come from the family Viola whittrockiana. It's a great name. Can in fact hybridize with certain wild violets because they share a common family and they share common roots. Not all of them, but some. So as both belong to the Viola genus, so while they share a genus, many cultivated pansies are complex hybrids that may not easily cross with all wild types. Just like a cultivated rose often has no scent left. Very, very often a cultivated rose is more colorful, it's bigger, but bigger is not better. It has lost its scent and most of the reason for being a rose. So in this case, but cross pollination can occur with similar species. And I happened upon a beautiful cluster of several individuals of each in Central Park that by proximity, I believe I witnessed epigenetic wild hybridization.
That's cool.
Which I will say, nature excels at what I term spontaneous execution.
Well, we know about horizontal gene transfer and horizontal gene. Yeah. So I mean, in a way, these are the kind of things as part of the process by which this manifests. I mean, I wonder if by chance there could be a possibility for kind of hybrid between, like, say, humans and, like, say, Christians or Muslims, and in the scented or the unscented. No, I'm just saying it's possible, like religious people and humans.
Yeah, I don't think we should go there.
No, it's possible though. I mean, it's possible.
It's possible, but let's stick to plants.
Yes, exactly. They're more complex, more interesting.
Yes, I would agree. Leading to new hybrid variations, even in the garden, but it's very rare when you have cultivated species. When a pansy is cultivated, it really loses this ability.
Mm.
And this goes right back to what I call spontaneous execution, which happens in the wild.
Mm.
These were not planted, these were off to the side of a lawn in Central Park. These weren't planted or curated, they were growing wild.
Mm.
They were growing in the grass by the side of the road.
I saw the photographs. It was
Yeah,
interesting.
I think
I mean, it's funny.
We're absolutely beautiful.
In the idea of kind of
yeah.
symbiogenesis, the idea is that their door is left open
Yeah.
for these kind of possibilities of the fact that, like, usually through a kind of stress, certain circumstances become necessary, and then they manifest that, like, certain things don't get totally digested or certain things don't get totally absorbed. So as a result, they kind of live partially within the host. I mean,
Yeah.
you think about the mitochondria in terms of our own cells and the fact that they were once independent organisms that basically now have given off portions of their own genetic material in order to coexist within the cell. So I mean, it is, yeah. So I mean, in this case, we kind of see it at a kind of at a much larger scale.
Yes, we do.
In the fact that these things. So I mean, again, that's always seemed the kind of relationship between the symbiogenic manifestation and the kind of like genetic manifestation seems to be also a situation of scale, similar to, say, maybe the fact that there's kind of seems to be an unresolvable mechanism between like the general relativity physics and the kind of like quantum physics. And as we go towards these kind of situations, it becomes unresolvable. Maybe it's unresolvable for a reason, but in that case, it seems to make a certain amount of sense.
Which brings me to, I would agree, my theory as to why these pansies spontaneously hybridized with the violets, which were wild, fooling herbivores. I think there are excellent reasons for all of these things. They were unlikely to be picked by humans. They were on the ground. They're very, very, very small. Most humans wouldn't even notice. There are a lot of herbivores in Central Park. It's full of rabbits and chipmunks and squirrels and a lot of animals that love to eat flowers, love to eat grass. So I don't know, but this is one of those great times where hypothesis versus discovery. I am hypothesizing that there is something very unpalatable in the violet that herbivores stay away from. If you kind of notice, they are not tattered, they're not eaten. The insects don't seem to eat them either.
No.
So if a pansy, which, as we know, you can eat pansies, there you can use them as a garnish on sweets in a salad. So the point is, a lot of pansies are in fact edible flowers. The violets may not be. I know you can, candy a violet. These are wild violets. And there may be, I mean, do you have any speculations as to why the pansies would move much closer to a wild cousin?
Yeah, I think, we talked about imitation last week.
Yeah.
And I think, we talked about the fact that there's some advantage. And the advantage probably is the fact that it warns off certain predators.
Yeah.
So I think that, given the circumstances as such that there's an advantage aided in this hybridization.
Yeah, there would have to be something, or they would not spontaneously.
Right. I mean, there's
hybridize.
usually a stressor or something that basically lends something along the lines to kind of make an adaptation. And I think in this case, I mean, if something is taken on, it's not as if someone says like, hey, you know what? It's like, hey, I'd love to kind of like just have wings, and then they just miraculously show up.
Yeah.
I mean, there's kind of much more of a fundamental kind of opportunism. But I think there's a kind of greater desperation in the fact that, like, in the symbiotic relationships, there's more of a network structure rather than in a tree structure, which is what we see in the kind of larger organisms. But again, the flower is a fairly sizable organism as opposed to kind of most of these things that take place at the kind of microbial or bacterial level.
True. This is a macro occurrence that you can see with the naked
and there probably
eye.
are more there are probably more macro occurrences than we know of. It's just that we kind of
this was a fun one to stumble on. It was great.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that okay, we're getting near the end here. So let's think about let me just see what we have next week. We're going to be talking about. Oh, okay, good.
What?
All right, activities. All right, so
activities?
Yeah. So I think the next two, we've been talking about this for a bit, and we're going to go back to it. And the next two pieces, one is our activities, and the next is the times of novel utility. So these are the kind of things we've been talking about this, and these kind of relate to some of the things that we've been saying the last 2 weeks. So we'll be kind of talking about that within the kind of concept of one of the things that I feel stagnates and is a tremendous inertial back, you know, inertial kind of like back, like undertow, which is the idea of kind of like the inability to generate novel utility.
I love a good undertow.
Yeah. Okay. So that's basically where we're heading after
That sounds
this.
exciting.
Yeah, exactly. So any last words here?
Well, I think that some of the most fascinating things are some of the most overlooked, undiscovered things. And that the true pleasures to be found in life are these small occurrences that have enormous intellectual ramifications. I couldn't stop thinking about this. It was a relatively small thing. No one else saw them. People walked right by. Everyone walked by. And in fact, I mentioned to a couple because I was so excited. I texted to you first, and I saw a couple, and I told them that, and they said, "Wow, you really made our day. This is something we never would have thought of, and now we can't stop, thinking about it." I think this is the kind of a beautiful small moment we could all use a lot more of right now.
But that brings up a good point, which is the fact of the idea of observance. I think one of the things that I think allows an individual to understand the significance of circumstance is creating a sense of an understanding of tuning yourself towards identification of circumstance, that one kind of trains yourself to be able to kind of look for those things that basically other people may feel but not understand. They may kind of like feel the imposition but not really understand what it means, like we talked about the principles. All right, anything else?
Oh no, I think that was
good. All right,
really
so
good.
The realm of ideas is free to all, my friends. It's just a benefit of us all to keep it just that way.
Hybridization.
Yes.